Recently I made a video which suggested that Race Driving might be the worst licensed official Super NES game of them all, and I said that if there's a worse game than this, I don't want to know what it is. That didn't stop people in the comments though letting the cat out of the bag and telling me about that worse game, but actually I'm glad that they broke the YouTuber/commenter bond of sacred trust in this instance, because the game they did tell me about is absolutely fascinatingly terrible. Horribly, wretchedly awful, in fact, a game that's somehow even worse than Hong Kong 97, the very much unlicensed, unofficial bootleg game from 1995. At least Hong Kong 97 can boast of being one of a very few examples of political satire in a video game, rare digital agitprop, but the game under discussion here has nothing to boast about whatsoever. What is it? Well, it's Pit Fighter. Released in 1992, there is just nothing good about it. It looks bad and sounds bad and plays bad. It's just bad. I'm sorry I'm reduced to such inane repetition, but that sums this game up perfectly. It's thoroughly inane and repetitive. And this is nowhere near so bad it's good territory either. It's not an endearing misfire, it's just boring. A Hong Kong version of the Atari arcade game that strips out absolutely everything that made it a hit in the arcades, and it was a pretty big hit in its original guise. And well, let's take a look at that, guys, because you might argue that even this version is pretty terrible, but well, entertainingly bad at least, and even a harsh critic would have to admit it absolutely was groundbreaking, technologically advanced, and probably quite influential. Yeah, this game hasn't aged well, but it came out in a very different world. For the past 25, 30 years or so, the place to find the absolute cutting edge of video games, whatever that may be, has been in your own home. Whether computer, console or handheld, it's a thing you own if you can afford it. From the 70s to the 90s though, the arcades was where you'd find the cutting edge, and the games on display there often weren't just a bit ahead of home systems, they were a whole generation at least. Rows and rows of futuristic technology laid out for your excited adolescent convenience, with only one downside. Yes, the other thing to note about coin-operated arcade games is that they're coin-operated. You don't own them, you need to put money in them to play. It was a competitive business, and arcade game makers had to make games that were big, bold, technically impressive, and most of all accessible and immediate. They needed to make you want to throw that coin into the slots. That's the tough world that Pit Fighter excelled in, and its biggest, most notable feature is the real digitised humans that appear in the action. Not the first game to do this. Williams' Narc came out a couple of years before, but it is the first fighting game with an all captured from life human cast. That alone made it stand out, and just the sheer novelty of it was enough to suck up lots and lots of loose change from passing pockets. To modern players who actually give this game a shot now, it's probably going to feel like it's lacking something, but every one-on-one fighter that came out before Street Fighter 2 now seems fairly low wattage. Yes, even the original Street Fighter 1 is honestly pretty awful in hindsight. You never would have guessed it could birth such a massive sequel, one that's completely, literally reinvented the fighting game. So in a world where even Street Fighter was still crappy, Pit Fighter might have seemed entertaining enough to throw money at, and it did do more than just have blokes in lycra pose for the camera. It also featured some other innovations too. The huge cast of crazy characters, the breakable props and weapons, the button bashing arena fighting thing. I'm sure that there were games that were directly influenced by Pit Fighter, but also I think it was just pretty prescient in coming up with good ideas that others would pick up on too later on. Atari Games, who created it, were definitely well used to creating those big, bold, eye-catching games for the arcade, but up to this point they tended to be fairly family-friendly, whimsical stuff mostly, but Pit Fighter was a change in direction for them that's definitely mirrored a bit of a shift in the industry too, to the more violent 90s attitude era of gaming, again pretty prescient. The working title of this game was Bloodsport, named after the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, and that just fits perfectly. Cheesy, silly, lowbrow entertainment, which there's no shame in enjoying once in a while, right? Daft, but enjoyable at the time, and well, they almost got it right, introducing ideas that later games would do a bit better. So what happened with the Super NES version? Well, I don't know. History doesn't say much on the development of this, but well, what we have is a complete awful ruin of a game that can only really be the result of a rushed job and contractual obligations. To be fair, it's not the worst version of this game. Yes, the bottom of the barrel is a long way down. There were a lot of conversions of this. The Amstrad CPC version is somehow even worse. Dear Lord, let's not get bogged down in this, but well, even this Dadaist prank of a game does at least attempt to recreate the features of the arcade game, most of which the Super NES version leaves out. No weapons, no breakable scenery, none of the scaling arena, just a very odd looking brown floor. One thing that is preserved is the very strange gait of the wrestler character Buzz. Some irregularity of mind or body at work, perhaps both, leave him walking like Max Wall, and if that reference isn't lost on you, well, do let me know in the comments. Actually, the main character graphics probably look better here than they do in any other home version, but that isn't saying much really. They still have weird glitched pixels, look like they've been hastily transferred somehow from another format and not touched up. None of the other graphics, what there is of them, look even remotely acceptable. I've no idea what happened with the crowd. I think coral excrement is what I would call this colorway. The game is running in graphics mode 1, which means this background layer can have 16 colours per tile block and 120 in total on screen at once, but it's using nothing like that, and I don't know why. This does seem to be a report of the Mega Drive version of the game, and well, the Mega Drive can handle fewer colours than the Super NES, but even that version is much more colourful. They might have reduced the colour to compress the data so that they could fit it all into the ROM, but even if the developers have done that, they could still have added some variety in the colour palettes without any extra cost. In fact, there seem to be some suitable colour palettes already loaded in the memory when the game is running, and they just haven't used them. The music and sound is really no better. A very irritating tune that goes nowhere and sounds like someone throwing a keyboard down the stairs, and some very muffled speech between levels. I have no idea what this guy is saying, but it's probably not particularly important. Most of all though, this game is just horrible to play. The original was not really all that much about careful execution of strategies, but all you can do here is just mash buttons and hope you somehow win. It doesn't feel like you're in control of your dude at all. It's like watching the attract mode whilst you jiggle your controller. It's also weirdly needlessly punishing with the difficulty. Your energy only restores after bonus rounds, and there's no lives and no continues. Get knocked out and it's game over. Yeah, the arcade was like this, but there you can feed in more money to keep playing, and home versions are usually at least a bit more generous. As I say, this seems to be based on the Sega Mega Drive version, and well, that does give you 3 continues and is in fact overall better in every possible way. It's still not amazing, my god, there are better fighting games on the Mega Drive, but it is a functional game with a lot more features. Interestingly, the Mega Drive version uses an 8 megabit cartridge, but the Super NES version has just a 4 megabit ROM cartridge. Cost cutting, presumably the reason behind that. They tried to cram it into a cheaper, lower capacity ROM chip. So, a dreadful game, and this was released on the Super NES in 1992, the same year that Street Fighter 2 appeared on the console, and also the same year that Mortal Kombat hit the arcades. Pit Fighter never stood a chance at this point. Mortal Kombat absolutely ate its lunch. All the silliness of digitised fighters in stupid outfits with even more parent-frightening gore. It's easy to pick up and play, yes, definitely a coin magnet, but with the heart of a very well-balanced fighting game underneath it all. It took inspiration from Street Fighter 2, but absolutely everyone did in the wake of that massive game. The formula was just so good. And Mortal Kombat did everything Pit Fighter set out to do, but better. The Super NES port is also thankfully much better too. Not perfect, but a very nice home version. A bit of a graphical downgrade, but all the gameplay features are there. The only thing missing is the gore. Yeah, that was toned down at Nintendo's insistence. They're still making Mortal Kombat games today, of course, a series that's never been dormant for all that long. No sequels to Pit Fighter, though, a gaming dead end. Well, not quite, actually. Come too far to turn back now, and there's a couple of stylistic successors, starting out with Guardians of the Hood from 1992. Yeah, this is absolutely a thing, isn't it? You know, this was going to be a video about crap Super NES games, but, well, I might as well carry on where this road takes me. This is definitely an oddity, a rare bird, a jewel of early 90s awesome kitsch. It makes Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles look like Ibsen. It's nothing but silly. A beat 'em up in the Final Fight mould mostly, but of course with digitised sprites and lots of them. Digitised everything, it goes hard on the stuff captured from life for a unique look. Gameplay wise, well, you know what, the late 80s and early 90s threw up some unforgettable beat 'em ups if you like that sort of thing, and this isn't one of them. It's not hopelessly broken, but, well, it's not that satisfying. Interspersed with the scrolling street battle stuff are one-on-one fights that do look and play an awful lot like Pit Fighter. You can tell it's from the same people. And in a post-Street Fighter 2 world, these aren't all that great now. Midway, who created Mortal Kombat, learned well from Street Fighter, but Atari, well, they don't seem to have been paying attention though, because it's just more silly button mashing. But I'm sure that the creators of this game knew how ludicrous it was and just went with the high camp vibe, tongue-in-cheek fun that owes more to modern dance than it does to martial arts. This game surprisingly didn't do as well as Pit Fighter. In fact, it seems to have sunk without trace, leaving not even a ripple in pop culture. No home conversions, no re-releases, completely forgotten. The gang of Frenchmen currently cosplaying as Atari have left this one well alone, but there is another even sillier, even more obscure digitised Atari game from the same year, Danger Express. At first glance, this might look like a run-and-gun game. The corridor sections of Contra are probably what spring to mind, but this plays more like a beat-em-up from behind somehow, which takes place mostly in alleyways and on trains for some reason, and yet it's cut from the same cloth as Pit Fighter and Guardians of the Hood. You can see it's got that similar sort of graphical style, and it kind of feels the same to play as well. I'm afraid this game was seemingly strangled at birth, if you're wondering why you've never heard a whisper of its existence. Ditched after poor results from location testing. It's hard to believe, I know. Which locations were these? Nursing homes? Convents? This is, well, it's sort of awesome. Yeah, okay, as an example of ridiculously 90s gaming farce, it is par excellence, but as a unironically enjoyable experience, it does leave something to be desired next to, Mortal Kombat and anything Sega or Capcom were putting out in the same era. It is crappy, but joyously crappy all these years later if you've got the right mindset. It almost doesn't look like a real game. It looks like something made for a TV show or a movie, cooked up by a bunch of guys in the VFX department who've seen games in action but don't really understand what they're about. A game Tim Allen would get hilariously addicted to in Home Improvement whilst bonding with his annoying children. The meat car level has to be the absolute highlight of all this. Yeah, that's what it's called, the meat car. More games should be set in inexplicably large meat trains. If GTA 6 is worth the hype, it's got to have a meat train level. You can almost call this avant-garde, almost. This being a prototype, it also crashes in amusing ways at times too, but let's start to wind things up now. Might not come as that much of a surprise, but this era was really the last gasp of old school Atari, split into two at this point, the hardware division Atari Corporation in a death spiral and the separate games entity Atari Games Corporation coming up with stuff like this. Though to be fair, they did still have a couple of hits left in them, like Primal Rage, which also had a Super NES conversion, which was, well, it was just boringly average rather than fascinatingly terrible. But this is the end now of a video that I didn't plan to make. I started making something else. This was going to be about terrible Super NES games, but I got sidetracked by silly digitised Atari games of the 90s, so let's leave it here and I'll try to get back to doing what I usually do in another video. So thank you to my glorious Patreons. Here they all are. Thank you very much. Your help does make a difference. If you would like to join them, there is a link below. And I will say thanks for watching and goodbye.